Hey everyone, it's your buddy, it's your pal, Karnik, Star Wars Armada Explained. Thank you so much for your patience. I know my videos have been almost non-existent for a little while, just working a lot. This is getting to the point where I'm just trying to get as much as I can made because in the wintertime, I don't work nearly as much, so I'll have more free time to make more videos, generate more content. I'm just trying to get to that point where I know I'm going to be okay through the winter, especially with the pandemic going on. So thank you again for your patience. We're going to be looking at the Salvo defense token. Somebody asked me why I haven't made a video on one yet, and I thought I had. Turns out I didn't. So let's cover that. Let's cover Salvo. So Salvo was a defense token introduced with the most recent expansions. It's also going to be potentially featured with the new Clone Wars, ships. I don't see why there wouldn't be Salvo on some of the new Clone Wars ships. But the Starhawk and the Onager come with it. You're able to put Salvo on some of your other ships depending on if you equip certain upgrade cards. But we're just mainly going to focus on how does Salvo resolve and what are some intricacies that it has. So Salvo, I'm going to read from the game manual. So a ship can spend this defense token to perform a Salvo attack after the resolve damage step of this attack. If the attacker was a ship, the defender performs a Salvo attack against the attacking hull zone using the defender's printed rear battery armament. If the attacker was a squadron, the defender performs a Salvo attack against the attacker using its printed anti-squadron armament. I do want to point out that I'm reading from my rules reference manual, the CARM is what I call it. Anything you see in black is word for word pulled from FFG's manual. Anything that you're going to see here that's in purple or in red is either purple's my response, or if it's in red, it's a former developer response or developer influenced response, okay? As with all things, this is not per FFG, but I'm making sure that I'm trying to follow as closely as I can per how FFG intended Salvo and these things interact and work. I did my homework, you could say. So the effect of the Salvo defense token cannot be resolved during a counter, salvo, or ignition attack. So you can't, just like with counter, you can't counter each other. Otherwise the game just goes crazy and it just takes too long to do stuff. During a Salvo attack, the attack range and line of sight are treated as the same as those of the original attack, and firing arcs are ignored. So it means is that, if they attacked you at medium range unobstructed, you also attack them back at medium range unobstructed. There's some very fine nuances in there, and we'll get into that. And thank you, Malwarebytes, for blocking some Trojans. The dice cannot be added to a Salvo attack. Other dice modifications are still able to be applied. During a Salvo attack, only the standard critical effect can be resolved unless another card effect states otherwise. If the ship that spent the Salvo defense token is destroyed before performing a Salvo attack, it performs a Salvo attack before it's removed, so just like counter. So Salvo and counter, they share a lot of similarities, but there's still like way different things that can happen. Because again, like a counter attack, you can like add dice to it. You can do all these other things with it. A Salvo attack, I want to be 100% perfectly clear because I still see people potentially messing this up. You can never add die to a Salvo attack, period. End of story. Do not pass go. Don't collect $200. Die can never be added to a Salvo attack, no matter what any other card effect says, unless, again, that caveat, that card effect specifically states that you can add dice in a Salvo attack, which currently there is no cards that do that, and honestly, there probably will never be a card that will allow you to do that, because Salvo is already very strong, because almost all ships in the game from the rear arc, not all ships, but a lot of ships, currently the maximum die that we've seen you can add from a rear battery armament attack is 3 dice. In the standard 400 port games, I haven't looked at the SSD Executor to see if it has more. Pretty much like 3 is the max, and that's a good number. That might even be, in my personal opinion, maybe even a little too high. But end of the day, you can never add die. What does it mean by other dice modifications to apply? If you want to spend a die to change another die to a different icon, like with Screed, totally fine. If you want to replace die that is in that attack pool with die of different color, like with Sato, all good. As it mentions there, you can never resolve any critical effect, period, unless, again, a card effect states that you can, like with Officer Agate. Officer Agate allows you to resolve a different critical effect other than the standard critical effect because the card says so. So if the card doesn't say you can do it, you can't do it. Why am I being so specific to that? Because, again, I've seen people try to resolve critical effects that you can't. Salvo doesn't let you do that. Okay. So, again, attack range is the same. Line of sight is the same. And again, if your ship was to be destroyed, it still is able to get its salvo attack before it's removed. Okay, let's get into, again, I'm going to be doing a lot of talking from here without demonstrating so much on the Vassal, because it is a lot of just physical talking. So one thing you do absolutely need to keep in mind when you spend the salvo defense token in the spend defense token step of your opponent's attack, when you state that you are using your salvo defense token, that is considered a declaration of an attack to be made when your opponent's current attack concludes. Okay, this defense token, the salvo token, cannot be resolved for no effect, nor can a player simply choose to then not attack like you can do with counter. Why is that? Why can you do this? So counter is after an attack has concluded, is the timing window for counter to then decide, do I want to counter or not counter? Okay, it's just yes or no. There are specific cards, and we're going to touch on it. It's mainly Coolant Discharge. So in the spend defense token step, when you state, hey, I am making this attack, and then you proceed on to the resolve damage step and then onwards, there is no takebacks. You cannot say, oh, oops, I didn't want to actually not use this defense token, and can I take that back? You've moved past that step. You're way past that step. You're beyond that timing window of, there's just no takebacks. You are declaring an attack, and you must make that attack. End of story. You cannot choose to not throw a dice pool once you resolve your salvo defense token. Again, why am I being so on the point and on the nose of that? Because there's card interactions where if you have declared salvo and then you get some things that happen, like you potentially may have messed up your own plans moving forward. So again, if you spend the salvo defense token, that is your declaration of attack. You must attack and you must roll a die pool. Okay. Moving on, even if a ship conducting a salvo attack has no printed armament in its rear hull zone or die in range to gather an attack pool, it is considered by the rules reference guide to have been an attack. Again, this is an important distinction I must emphasize, especially considering how this interacts with the damage card Coolant Discharge, which we're going to cover right now. So again, if you somehow equip a ship that has no rear die armament, because again, it still has an anti-squadron armament you can use salvo for. But even if it doesn't have a die pool you can collect to roll an attack, again, if you salvo for whatever reason in an anti-ship attack, it is still an attack. So again, get on to the Coolant Discharge. So what does Coolant Discharge do? So Coolant Discharge is a critical damage card that if you get faced up, you can only attack once per round, period. That ship with that damage card, Coolant Discharge, can only attack once per round. This includes salvo. So in a game, I have seen this, which is why I'm being very poignant with it. It's the start of a round. Somebody attacked an onager with a squadron or something, and the opponent with the onager is like, oh, okay, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to salvo. And then the squadron was a bomber, and it pulled on that onager Coolant Discharge. that onager had to attack that squadron, and that was its one attack around. Even though it was set up perfectly for an ignition shot, can't make it. Because again, Coolant Discharge is you can only attack once per round. So he wasted his attack on a salvo attack on a squadron, and now his onager cannot, unless he had repair or something, which he didn't. He didn't anticipate getting this damage card. So he pulled that damage card, and even though he had this perfect shot on this small ship he was going to obliterate, he couldn't attack anything because that damage card immediately comes into effect. And he made his attack, that salvo attack. So again, Coolant Discharge, this will affect salvo when attacking ships if this damage, or squadrons. If this damage card is drawn on a defending ship during the resolve damage step of attack, if the defender had also spent a salvo token, this damage card comes into effect immediately, and the defender must continue to attack with salvo, as spending the salvo defense token in effect declares an attack, and that attack must be made. Alright, so again, emphasizing all of this. So this is another question that a lot of people, when this token was first announced, people were like, oh, like I don't understand how it works. Where does the attack come from? So when somebody is attacking, we'll say the Starhawk is attacking this onager, and it's attacking from its front arc into the onager's front arc, and the onager declares the use of a salvo defense token, people were confused about where the attack was coming from. Which, again, the developers try really hard to make sure they're being clear with the rules, and there's a lot. It's pretty clear what their intent was, but again, which hull zone does the salvo attack originate from? The salvo attack originates from the hull zone that is defending using the printed armament of the rear hull zone, and I have the feedback from a former developer, Brooks. It says that hull zone that was defending when the salvo defense token is resolved, because that is the targeting point used to determine line of sight. So again, if you're using the same range and the same line of sight as the attacker, the obvious conclusion is obviously it's that hull zone that was attacked that is then attacking back using the same range and the same line of sight. Okay? Perfect. We've already went over that you need to spend, when you spend the salvo defense token, you're making a declaration of attack. If the salvo attack is obstructed by another ship or obstacle, so if there's like an obstacle in the way, and it is causing obstruction, what happens with General Rumdomi? General Rumdomi's card effect still stands, okay? You don't remove a dice due to the obstruction, but you can't add anything either. So Rumdomi is actually really good with salvo, because essentially you can never be obstructed and you'll never lose a die, unless it's a card effect, or not a card effect. Well, however his ability works, I'm not going to go into intricacies for any of that. Pretty much, if it's obstruction caused by a ship or obstacle, Rumdomi is not obstructed, and he can toss his die. But again, he can't add a die either, so he's good with that. What about going on with Akbar and Salvo? Salvo can be restricted by Akbar's ability. It's the same thing with how Akbar and Counter work right now. So remember, when you resolve Akbar's card ability, you're saying, I'm going to attack either from my left or my right hull zones for the rest of the round. Okay? So if Akbar's ability has been declared by that ship, for example, let's say that ship activated, it declared it's using Akbar to attack only from its left and right hull zones, it moves, and then an enemy ship attacks its front hull zone, it cannot salvo from its front hull zone, because that's making an attack that's not from its left or right hull zones. Because again, an Akbar can only attack from left or right if his card effect's in his use, cannot attack from front or rear. So no salvoing, no countering. So pretty much if you're using salvo with Akbar, you need to be really careful that you're not pointing front arcs towards enemies, because then if you get hit there, you can't salvo from that front or rear arc. So yeah, as written, Akbar does affect this effect once he is resolved, not before. So, it does pose a serious memory issue if players can't remember if Akbar resolved his ability. You should be able to remember, but it's something that's recognized that, oh, maybe we need to try to fix this ability on Akbar and his interaction with Salvo, but it's not something you're going to see resolved anytime soon. So again, when using Akbar and you have salvo on Akbar ships, if you've resolved Akbar's effect, you cannot have that ship salvo from its front or rear hull zones. Period. End of story. Okay. How does salvo work with solo Corona? So the objective special rule. So remember, if you are have a ship's firing arc pointed towards where the Corona is, or the Corona is, excuse me, the Corona, you do lose a die according to the objective, or how so because people are saying, oh, the firing arcs are ignored, so they don't count. No, 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 that's not what it means. So in this situation, we're going to say that you're salvoing. The Corona is over here. So again, when it's saying you're ignoring firing arcs, it means your opponent's firing arcs or your own firing arcs. Because your opponent can have a ship placed to where he can have line of sight on you, and he's clear of the defender's firing arc. But then when you draw a line of sight back, maybe you're hitting his firing arc, and you can't make the attack. Okay, so with salvo, it's saying you ignore firing arcs just for the purposes of, it doesn't matter that when you drew line of sight, if it's crossing over their hull zone, you can still shoot because they shot you. That's fine. What it means by you ignore firing arcs is in that case. It doesn't mean that they don't exist. So they still do exist for resolving the Corona effect. So again, if you need to remove a die, you still need to remove a die according to that objective special rule. So again, you only ignore firing arcs for the purposes of drawing line of sight. You're not ignoring them as if they just don't ever exist on your ship, period. They are still there. You're just not following that part of the rule when conducting an attack. Okay. Here's where we get to the super complicated stuff. Okay. So keep in mind any interaction with salvo and the upgrade card, Gunnery Teams, and the objective advanced gunnery. As per the card, the Gunnery Teams, if that hull zone cannot target the same ship or squadron more than once during that activation, meaning if an enemy ship or squadron attacks the same hull zone twice during their activation, like if they're using Yavaris, you would be unable to salvo or counter quad laser turrets at the same target twice. You'd only be able to attack them once. What do I mean by that? So if this squadron flew up to the front of the hull zone of this onager, and it somehow has the ability to salvo and counter, and it also has the upgrade card Gunnery Team equipped, you would only be able to salvo or counter, not both, if you have Gunnery Teams. Because again, Gunnery Teams has that restriction of you can't shoot it again from your same hull zone that's already shot it. That's per that ship's activation. So, but if it's straddling the line, for example, you can salvo it out your front, and then as per quad laser turret's counter, you can choose a different hull zone, like the left one, to then attack that squadron from. But you can't do it both from the same zone. And again, that's only in a niche case of Yavaris, or somehow another ship was able to attack twice from the same hull zone, which that's for advanced gunnery, for example. If the Starhawk has advanced gunnery and it's second player and it shoots twice out the front, you would only be able to salvo back once. You wouldn't be able to do it twice. Because again, you can only attack that target once with your hull zone if you have Gunnery Teams equipped. If you don't have Gunnery Teams equipped, don't need to worry about anything. Blast away. So now we're going to get into the objective advanced gunnery. As for advanced gunnery, the first player's objective ship may perform each of its attacks from the same hull zone. It cannot target the same hull zone or squadron more than once each round of that hull zone. Meaning, if the target has been attacked before your ship's activation or during, it can no longer be attacked that round at all from the same hull zone, period. Again, to walk through it, we'll say that this onager is the first player's objective ship in advanced gunnery. He's like, haha, I'm going to get this guy, and I'm going to shoot out my front. Pow-pow. Wait, did I read that right? Yes. Okay, yeah. It cannot target the same hull zone. So if you have it double arced, and you shoot out the front, you cannot shoot with your left hull zone into it. Because again, as it states, you cannot target the same hull zone or squadron more than once each round. Oh no, with that hull zone, excuse me. So, what that also, to step back and to go through this again, so you do have a double arc. You do have the first player advanced gunnery thing where you can attack twice, but again, you can only attack once per hull zone on the enemy's hull zone. Then let's say that Starhawk activates, and then it shoots you in your front hull zone. You can't salvo it, because again, you can only target that hull zone once per round from a hull zone that's already attacked it. So if you've already shot from front to front on your activation, and from side to front, again on your activation, then the Starhawk activates, shoots you from its front to your front, you can't salvo it back, because you cannot attack that hull zone again. Period. End of story. This is a danger as well, because let's say that Starhawk activates first, shoots you first. If you salvo it from your front, when you activate, you will not be able to shoot it from your front, because you've already attacked it with salvo. Same thing with squadrons. Like, if you've countered a squadron, if you already salvoed a squadron, you can't attack it again with that advanced gunnery first player special rule wording. So I know it's kind of very fine intricacies. Again, you can kind of read in this in the CARM if you need to go over it in your brain. Just again, that's how the rules work with that objective and with the Gunnery Team card. You just got to be very, very selective and very careful with understanding what your ship can and can't do depending on what's going on there. So again, for the most part with advanced gunnery, just if you're first player, just don't salvo stuff unless that's pretty much the only time you know you're ever going to shoot that ship, or if you plan to shoot other stuff. Because again, you can get yourself pigeonholed into a position where your ship can't attack because it already attacked it because of salvo. All right. So that is salvo. That's the defense token. So I'm going to go through it one more time, just in the bare bones about how, again, this defense token works. We'll say that this Onager is attacking the Starhawk. It shoots the Starhawk. In the spend defense token step, the Starhawk says, I'm going to spend this token. It's my declaration of attack. It's going to use the same line of sight. So we've got from front to front. It's clear. There's no obstructions. We're at close range. Great. My Onager then throws, or it resolves the damage, whatever it threw with its attack pool. That attack ends. Starhawk says, okay, your attack is ended. My attack now begins. I have declared this attack in the spend defense token step. I must follow through with this attack. Using the 3 die, my printed rear arc battery, 2 reds, 1 black. Again, same line of sight, same distance. So you throw your initial attack pool. You can never add die to that attack pool. You can still spend and modify die in any other way. You just guess, again, you can't ever add die. You resolve the pool and the modified die effects. And when you get to critical effects you can resolve, you can only ever resolve the standard critical effect unless, again, there's a card stating that you can do otherwise, like with Officer again. And then that attack concludes. And then your opponent then goes back to his ship to then either make an attack or move it or etc. Okay? That's salvo. But again, if you have questions, you're still not quite understanding how the defense token works, please be sure to leave a comment, message, let me know about it. You guys are fantastic, and I'll catch you all next time.